Hello, everyone. There's a moment in every generation when we must decide what kind of legacy we're leaving behind. Not the kind measured in wealth or headlines, but in the conditions we shape for those who come next. That moment isn't coming, it's already here. And the defining question before us isn't whether we have the tools to build a peaceful world. We do. The question is whether we have the leadership to use them. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of systems, policies, and mindsets that make violence unnecessary. It is the result of intentional design, sustained commitment, and often difficult decisions. In this age of interconnected challenges, climate disruption, economic inequality, geopolitical instability, leading with peace is no longer idealistic. It's essential. Peace doesn't arrive by accident. It isn't the natural outcome of the passing of time or the byproduct of a lucky set of global circumstances. It's a result of decisions, often difficult ones, made by people in positions of influence. It's a choice, a deliberate strategy, a leadership stance. And in a world where crises increasingly intersect, climate instability, resource scarcity, political polarization, choosing peace is one of the most urgent, courageous things any leader can do. Many still view peace as a passive condition, something that fills the space when conflict disappears. But that mindset fundamentally underestimates the complexity of what peace actually requires. Maintaining peace, let alone building it, is one of the most active responsibilities of governance. It demands investment, innovation, negotiation, and long-term thinking. It's built in classrooms and hospitals, not just at diplomatic tables. It thrives where there is trust, infrastructure, and economic opportunity, and it breaks down fastest where those things are absent. Around the world, data shows that conflict rarely erupts in places where basic human needs are being met, where children have access to education, communities have access to health care, and economies create jobs that support families. The conditions for violence shrink dramatically. These aren't abstract ideals, they're measurable indicators. And yet too many governments still allocate exponentially more to defense budgets than to health, education, or social programs. The global security equation remains tilted toward reactive force instead of proactive stability. That's not to say security doesn't matter, it does. But without addressing the root causes of instability, security becomes a costly cycle. Think of it like a leaking dam. You can keep patching the holes as they appear, or you can reinforce the foundation so that new ones don't emerge in the first place. The second option takes longer. It's harder to explain to taxpayers or voters. But it works better in the long run, and it saves lives, not just from violence, but from disease, displacement, and despair. Leadership that prioritizes peace has to be strategic. It needs to be informed by data and grounded in the realities of a changing world. Consider how climate change is already driving migration and food insecurity in several regions. As arable land shrinks and weather patterns grow more volatile, competition over resources is escalating. This isn't a future scenario, it's unfolding now, and it's creating tensions that could either be mitigated through collaboration or inflamed by neglect. The difference lies in whether decision makers are willing to act before crisis hits. Technology, if used wisely, offers a powerful toolkit for peace. Predictive analytics can help identify risk factors for violence long before tensions boil over. Satellite data can monitor crop health, enabling early interventions before famine strikes. Mobile banking platforms can provide financial access to the previously excluded, reducing the economic desperation that often fuels unrest. The potential is enormous, but only if the intention behind it is clear. The point isn't just innovation for its own sake, but innovation aimed at stability and inclusion that brings the conversation back to leadership. It's easy to lead with urgency during wartime. Rallying a nation under threat is an instinctive act. What's harder is leading with the same intensity when the threats are slower, quieter, but no less real: chronic poverty, systemic inequality, erosion of trust in public institutions. These are all peace-threatening forces, but they rarely command headlines. That's why they demand visionary leadership, people who can see beyond the political cycle, who are willing to put in the work even when the results may not be immediate. It also requires a broader definition of who a leader is. Leadership doesn't just happen in parliaments or presidential offices. It happens in city councils, in boardrooms, in local nonprofits, and even in coding labs. Leadership is any act that improves lives, reduces suffering, and strengthens community. When those actions are aligned toward stability and equity, they build peace from the ground up. History will remember those who turned their backs on fear and retribution in favor of foresight and responsibility. Not every era offers the same clarity of what's at stake, but this one does. The world doesn't lack knowledge, it doesn't lack tools, it doesn't lack opportunity. It simply needs more people, especially those with power, to choose peace as their governing principle, not their backup plan. Because peace isn't what happens when we do nothing. It's what happens when we do everything we can to make it possible. And that's the kind of leadership the world needs now more than ever. Peace is not a moment, it's a system. And like all systems, it only lasts when the foundation is stable and the moving parts are in balance. Across history, one pattern has remained consistent. Where equity grows, conflict recedes. Where opportunity is shared, violence loses its appeal. And where people see a pathway to improve their lives, they are far more likely to invest in the future rather than tear it down. That's why real, lasting peace isn't just about treaties or ceasefires. It's about creating a world where everyone has a fair shot at living a meaningful life. Inequality isn't just a moral problem, it's a practical one. Disparities in income, access to health care, quality education, and basic infrastructure don't just reflect injustice, they generate instability. When communities are locked out of growth, when certain groups feel permanently marginalized, it doesn't take much for discontent to fester. This is where unrest often begins, not always with ideology, but with unmet needs. If people can't feed their families, access a doctor, or find a job with dignity, frustration builds, and that frustration can become volatile. There's an overwhelming amount of evidence connecting inequity with fragility. Countries with high inequality often experience slower economic growth and higher rates of civil unrest. Regions where resources are controlled by a small elite are more vulnerable to political violence. And when public institutions are weak, when people don't trust the courts or the police or the schools, communities become fragmented, trust breaks down, progress halts, and peace becomes impossible to sustain. On the other hand, the opposite is also true. In places where health outcomes improve, where girls are educated, where small farmers have access to markets and microloans, the likelihood of conflict drops dramatically. These are the investments that don't always show up in military budgets, but they are the ones that truly disarm future violence. Access to clean water, reliable electricity, and digital connectivity, these things may not make headlines, but they fundamentally shift what's possible for communities that have been left behind. Technology has opened new doors in this regard. Remote learning platforms can reach students in conflict zones. Mobile health clinics can serve rural areas cut off from central hospitals. Data-driven agriculture can help small-scale farmers adapt to changing climates and improve yields. But tools are only as powerful as the intent behind them. Progress requires deliberate, coordinated effort. It's not enough to deploy technology. We have to design systems that include everyone, especially those who have been overlooked. The reality is that inequality has become a global threat multiplier. It's at the root of forced migration, of rising populism, of social discontent that spreads faster than ever across digital platforms. This doesn't mean erasing all differences. Every society will have variation, but it does mean ensuring that those differences aren't destiny, that your zip code, your gender, or your income bracket doesn't determine whether you survive a disease, or receive a quality education, or get to participate in your country's economy. Achieving this is not about charity. It's about strategy. Equitable progress is one of the best investments any government, institution, or company can make, not only for ethical reasons, but because it builds a more stable, prosperous environment for everyone. Peace thrives in places where people feel they have something to lose and something worth protecting. That comes from opportunity, from the ability to imagine a better future and to believe it's within reach. Progress has to be measured not just by GDP or market growth, but by how broadly that growth is shared. Are rural communities benefiting? Are children with disabilities learning? Are women being paid fairly and promoted equally? These aren't secondary questions, they are central, because a society that leaves whole groups behind is a society laying the groundwork for tension. It's easy to underestimate how far a single investment can go. A clinic in a remote village can reduce maternal mortality and increase trust in public systems. A school with internet access can inspire a child to become an engineer who solves local infrastructure problems. A cash transfer program can stabilize a family through a bad season and prevent a child from dropping out of school. Multiply that by millions, and suddenly peace stops being an ideal. It becomes a byproduct of a well-designed system. If we want peace to last, then progress has to reach further. It has to be inclusive, it has to be intentional, and it has to be grounded in the understanding that stability doesn't come from force. It comes from fairness. When people are empowered to contribute, to create, and to grow, peace follows, not as a dream, but as a natural consequence of equity. The tools humanity has developed in recent decades are extraordinary. We now live in a world where a smartphone can connect a child in a remote village to an entire library of information, where satellites can monitor crop health across continents, and where artificial intelligence can forecast natural disasters before they occur. These technologies have incredible potential, not just to improve lives but to save them, but the direction they take isn't pre-programmed. It depends entirely on the priorities we set. And if peace isn't one of them, then we risk using our most powerful tools for purposes that widen inequality, deepen divisions, and fuel instability. Technology, at its best, solves problems, but too often it gets built to serve profit before people. That's not inherently wrong. Business is a major driver of innovation, but when market incentives are the only compass, it leads to a future that isn't evenly distributed. A new vaccine, for example, can halt a deadly outbreak. But if it's only available to the richest countries, the rest of the world remains vulnerable, not just biologically, but politically and economically. That kind of disparity feeds resentment and distrust. It weakens peace at the very moment it should be strengthening it. Data offers a similar paradox. On one hand, it can make institutions smarter, systems more efficient, and policies more targeted. It can show us which communities are most at risk of famine, which school districts are falling behind, and where emergency services are needed most. But on the other hand, if misused or left ungoverned, data can become a tool of manipulation, exclusion, and even oppression. The challenge isn't whether we should use data, but how we choose to apply it and for whose benefit. When guided by the right goals, the potential impact is profound. Imagine health surveillance systems that detect disease outbreaks in real time, allowing local governments to intervene before they spread. Picture digital platforms that connect job seekers to training programs, or farmers to weather data that can help them plant more efficiently. These are not fantasies, they're realities in many places already, but they only scale when someone decides that social good is just as important as return on investment. Peace, in many ways, is about foresight. It's about recognizing tensions before they become crises. This is where technology should be playing a more proactive role. Machine learning can identify patterns of hate speech before they erupt into violence. Remote sensing can track migration trends linked to climate change, allowing for smarter, more humane policy responses. Even something as simple as SMS alerts can give families the time to evacuate ahead of natural disasters. But these applications only happen when peace is seen as a metric worth optimizing for. Of course, the story isn't one-sided. Technology has also accelerated some of the very problems we're trying to solve. Social media platforms, while offering new avenues for expression and connection, have also become engines of division and misinformation. Algorithms optimized for engagement often reward outrage over nuance. That's not an inevitable feature of technology, it's a reflection of how we've chosen to build and govern it. We need to rethink those choices and place human well-being and stability at the center of design. Equally important is access. The benefits of technology are still unevenly distributed. Billions of people remain offline, excluded from digital services that could improve their health, education, and livelihoods. That digital divide isn't just a tech issue, it's a peace issue. When some communities are accelerating forward and others are standing still, the imbalance creates tension. It fosters a sense of being left behind, which can lead to polarization and even radicalization. Closing that gap should be seen as an investment in global harmony. The truth is, every advancement we make comes with a question: who is it helping, who is it leaving out, and what kind of future is it building? If we can't answer those questions with peace and equity in mind, we're not aiming high enough. The goal isn't just to innovate, but to innovate in ways that stabilize and uplift the human condition. Technology will continue to shape the future, that much is certain. But whether it drives us further apart or brings us closer together is still up to us. The opportunity is enormous, but so is the responsibility. Peace can't be an afterthought or a byproduct. It must be a priority, designed into the system from the start. If we want a future where peace is not the exception but the norm, then every algorithm, every platform, every device must be part of that vision. Not just built to scale profits, but built to serve people and to protect the fragile, beautiful possibility of a peaceful world. Technology has redefined what's possible. We can now collect more information in a day than entire civilizations once gathered in centuries. We can model entire ecosystems, forecast economic shifts, and simulate the long-term effects of policies before they're implemented. But with that power comes a very real dilemma. Are we using these tools to build a more peaceful, inclusive world, or simply to maximize short-term gains? Because the line between progress and peril is defined not by what we can do, but by what we choose to do with what we've built. The story of innovation has always had two sides. On one, extraordinary breakthroughs that have saved lives, connected people, and lifted billions out of poverty. On the other, technologies that have deepened inequality, enabled surveillance without accountability, and accelerated the spread of misinformation. The dividing factor isn't the technology itself, it's the intent, the structure, and the incentives behind it. Profit isn't inherently a bad motive. It drives entrepreneurship, fuels investment, and speeds up development. But when it becomes the only motive, we start designing systems that reward scale, speed, and stickiness over stability, safety, and trust. That's especially dangerous in sectors that influence how people think, communicate, and interact. For instance, social platforms that optimize for engagement often give louder microphones to outrage than to dialogue. The unintended result, social cohesion erodes and public discourse becomes a battlefield. There's also a growing imbalance in who holds the power to create, distribute, and govern technology. As data becomes the most valuable commodity on the planet, those who control it wield disproportionate influence, not just over markets, but over minds. In many parts of the world, this has outpaced the capacity of institutions to regulate, protect, or even understand what's happening. And that imbalance, if left unchecked, will continue to widen the gap between those who shape the future and those who are shaped by it. To serve peace, technology must first serve people. That means putting inclusion at the center. A platform that only works for the wealthy, or a tool that's inaccessible to people in rural or underserved areas, is not just a missed opportunity. It's a breeding ground for resentment. When communities see the world transforming around them and feel excluded from that progress, frustration grows, and in too many places, that frustration has turned into instability. It also means transparency. Data is one of our most powerful tools for problem solving. It can tell us where the next pandemic might emerge, where students are falling behind, where resources are being misallocated. But if that data is hoarded or worse, manipulated for narrow interests, it undermines trust and makes collaboration nearly impossible. Peace requires trust between governments and citizens, between companies and users, between nations. Technology should be a bridge for that trust, not a barrier. There are already powerful examples of how data and technology can support peace directly. Early warning systems that track potential outbreaks of violence. Digital identification systems that make public services more accessible and reduce corruption. Agricultural platforms that use satellite imagery to help farmers in climate-stressed regions make better. There's a growing misconception that leadership in times of crisis is about outmaneuvering others, about gaining advantage while the world is distracted, or about securing short-term wins at any cost. But the more interconnected the world becomes, the less effective that kind of thinking is. Pandemics don't respect borders. Climate change doesn't pause for politics. Food shortages, water scarcity, energy disruptions. None of these challenges care about national interest or competitive posturing. They are systemic, and the only way to address them is with leadership that prioritizes cooperation over rivalry. When one country hoards vaccines, the virus doesn't disappear, it mutates. When a region pollutes its rivers or overuses its farmland, it affects ecosystems that stretch far beyond its boundaries. When supply chains are disrupted by war, floods, or trade disputes, it's not just local economies that suffer, it's a ripple effect. These crises make it clear isolation is not a strategy. If anything, it's a vulnerability. In the face of global challenges, success is no longer defined by who gets ahead first, but by who brings others along. This isn't an idealistic argument, it's a practical one. Cooperation reduces redundancy, maximizes resources, and speeds up innovation. Think about scientific research. When data is shared across borders, breakthroughs happen faster. When climate models are developed collaboratively, they become more accurate. When health systems pool knowledge during a pandemic, lives are saved. Competition has its place, especially when it fuels excellence. But when it stands in the way of information sharing or coordinated response, it becomes a liability. The private sector has long understood the value of strategic partnerships. No company, no matter how powerful, builds every part of its product alone. They collaborate across industries, invest in startups, and license ideas. The same logic needs to apply to leadership at the global level. Governments, NGOs, and institutions must learn to act not just within their silos, but across them, because innovation isn't just about invention, it's about scale, and scaling solutions to global problems takes teamwork. It also takes humility. Too often, leadership is defined by certainty, by having all the answers, but in times of unprecedented change, the leaders who make the biggest impact are the ones who know how to listen, who can say, "We don't know yet, but let's figure it out together." That kind of openness builds trust, and trust is the foundation of any meaningful collaboration. The reality is, we're already seeing what happens when competition takes precedence over cooperation. Vaccine nationalism, trade wars, stalled climate negotiations, digital fragmentation. These are all symptoms of a leadership culture that sees the world as a zero-sum game, and they've cost us years of progress, billions of dollars, and countless lives. Every crisis that becomes protracted is, at least in part, a leadership failure. Not a failure of capability, but of mindset. There's a better path forward. One where countries share tools and best practices not out of charity, but out of mutual interest. One where wealthy nations invest in the resilience of poorer ones because they understand that global stability is in everyone's best interest. One where leadership isn't about dominance, but about enabling others to lead too. We need frameworks that reward joint action. That means redesigning institutions to reflect the world as it is now, not as it was decades ago. It means rethinking how we fund global health, how we respond to humanitarian emergencies, how we govern emerging technologies. And it means recognizing that power isn't just about control, it's about influence. The ability to bring people together, to align goals, to build consensus. That's real power in the modern world. Leadership today demands a long view, one that looks past the next election cycle or quarterly earnings report, one that understands that prosperity is more durable when it's shared, that peace is more likely when dignity is universal, that innovation is more meaningful when it includes the voices of those most affected by the problems we're trying to solve. The biggest challenges of our time will not be met with slogans or isolationist policies. They will be met with collaboration, transparency, and the will to see beyond borders. Leadership is no longer about going it alone. It's about recognizing that in a truly global era, the only victories that matter are the ones we win together. In almost every major turning point in history, youth and civil society have played the role of quiet architects, building change not through force, but through persistence, ideas, and a deep desire for a better future. They aren't always in front of the cameras or seated at negotiation tables, but they're shaping conversations, influencing policy from the ground up, and helping communities imagine alternatives to conflict. When systems falter or institutions lose the public's trust, it's often the young people and local organizations that step in, not just to protest what's wrong, but to prototype what's possible. Young people bring a kind of clarity that's hard to replicate. They haven't grown cynical from decades of bureaucracy or hardened by partisan battles. Their questions are straightforward. Why is this still a problem? What would it take to fix it? They're not burdened by the way things have always been done. That makes them incredibly powerful when it comes to innovation, especially social innovation. From climate justice to education, reform to digital inclusion, some of the most creative solutions have come from young people who weren't waiting for permission to start. Civil society, whether in the form of community groups, nonprofits, faith-based networks, or informal movements, has a similarly outsized impact. These are the connectors and translators between policy and people. They know what works at the grassroots level. They understand the nuance of local dynamics that don't always make it into official reports. And they often do their work without much recognition or support, even though their role in preventing conflict, restoring trust, and healing division is essential. Peace is not just the absence of war. It's the presence of systems that support fairness, opportunity, and mutual respect. And those systems are rarely designed in isolation. They come from dialogue, from people showing up in rooms together who disagree, and staying there long enough to find common ground. Youth organizations and civil society are often the ones creating these spaces, where it's safe to disagree, where new narratives can emerge, and where solutions are co-created rather than imposed. One of the most important things they bring is proximity. Governments and institutions, especially at higher levels, can become distanced from the people they serve, not out of malice, but because systems scale, and that often means they become less personal. Civil society works differently. It operates closer to the pain points and closer to the aspirations. That proximity allows for early warning. If a community is on edge, if tensions are rising, it's often local organizations that notice first. They can respond faster, more contextually, and sometimes more effectively than centralized authorities. Technology has also given youth and civil society new tools to organize, educate, and mobilize. A single tweet or video can galvanize global support. Online platforms allow ideas to spread across borders. Crowdsourcing and crowdfunding have opened doors that used to be locked behind large institutions. But with that reach comes risk of surveillance, misinformation, and digital exclusion. So the question becomes, how do we support young leaders and grassroots organizers not just with tools, but with protection, training, and long-term investment? What's needed is not just admiration for their efforts, but structural inclusion. Too often, young people are invited to youth panels, while decisions are made elsewhere. Civil society is asked for feedback after policies are already drafted. That's backwards. Real inclusion means bringing these voices into the design phase, letting them co-own the process, funding their work sustainably, measuring success not just in terms of reach or GDP, but in terms of how effectively communities are being heard and served. There's also a deeper cultural shift that needs to happen. The assumption that age equals wisdom needs to be balanced by the recognition that fresh perspectives offer unique value. The belief that peace is only negotiated in boardrooms needs to be expanded to include classrooms, public squares, and virtual communities, because sometimes the most profound changes start not with declarations, but with small, steady acts of courage. Students starting tutoring circles in conflict zones, neighbors organizing food drives during unrest, artists using their platforms to spark healing conversations. The road to peace is long, and it doesn't follow a single route, but we get much further, much faster, when we walk it with those who see the world not only for what it is, but for what it could still become. Youth and civil societies are not footnotes in that journey. They are the spark. The goal is not just to support them, but to learn from them, to build with them. And to remember that sustainable peace isn't something we hand down. It's something we create together, generation by generation, from the ground up. So this is a call, not just to presidents or prime ministers, but to CEOs, students, engineers, artists, and everyone in between. Lead with peace. Demand it, design for it, fund it. It won't always be the popular choice, but it will be the right one, and in time it may be the only one that saves us. Let the legacy of this generation be defined not by the wars we fought, but by the peace we built. Not by fear, but by foresight. Not by power, but by purpose. And when history looks back, let it say, they chose harmony because they had the vision and the courage to lead for it.